as a Jungian life coach, I am just there beside them, helping to shine a light and explore with them. And maybe where there's block, help them see, well, let's look through this little crack here, or let's look around this bend. Because when we get overwhelmed by Shania's shame, or like when it comes to doubt, I was called the Duke of Doubtington. So the Duke of Doubtington, we get caught up in that wall of it. And so having an outside observer, helping to ask questions that breaks us around, helping to do different visualizations and check in where in our body we experience things, helps us to basically bypass some of the barriers that we've set up for ourselves.
This is Flavors of Emotions, expanding your emotional palate for a tastier life. My name is Kim Cordy. Together, we explore how to make sense of our feelings through the lens of a chef, understanding flavors in a recipe. I am here to help you refine your emotional palate to differentiate the emotions that shape your world. Hello and welcome, my dear friend and my very first guest ever on this podcast, Angelina Caporale. Angelina is a certified Jungian life coach. And in fact, she is on her way to getting a master's in it. She is amazing. And I think at the end of this, you will love her as much as me, if possible, but I think you might. And Angie, welcome. I just got to get started with, what is a Jungian life coach? Because I am sure there's a lot of people out there who are like, what is that?
Thank you for asking, and thank you for having me. So a Jungian life coach is based on Carl Jung's, who is an amazing psychologist that was around the same time as Freud, that was doing analytical psychology, and his belief that the individuation process is the most important process for a human, that we come here on this planet. And part of that process is diving into the collective unconscious, the collective wisdom that we all have access to, and being able to pull out different parts that communicate with us to make aspects of ourself that we have shoved or deemed that are not a part of us into our shadow, a place of our unconscious. And while when things remain there, we act wonky sometimes. Things come up and we have knee-jerk reactions and we respond in a certain way that's not by choice. So by pulling things out of the shadow, working with the collective unconscious, working with archetype, we can then integrate these aspects of ourselves that become a part of our toolkit, so that we, when things happen in our world, that we can respond from a place of choice and creation instead out of just feral instinct and out of fear.
There's two aspects of that like I am totally into, which is having your reactions be a choice and to not react to fear. So yes, all into that. Just to help further clarify, because I know that the collective consciousness has been mentioned a lot and how that works.
Yes, so the collective consciousness is considered something that is available to everyone. And it's when we get to experience it more, it's considered that like dreams and symbols come up to us. And it's the way that the collective unconscious communicate with us. So dream analysis was really, really important in Jungian psychology, and where there's multitudes of levels of what the different symbols in the dream could mean. So it could be something that means something directly to us, and it could also have a bigger meaning in it that refers to what our whole world, everything that has been experienced in the evolution of mankind, that we have that knowledge to draw upon. But it is like, think of it as like the etheric web of information. And your dreams are like a Google, YouTube. So up pops the information that you need.
Yeah, like my crazy dream the other night when I dreamt I was dying of cancer and I only had 2 or 3 weeks to live. These dreams feel so real. Like, and you wake up and you're like, man, am I going to die? But, just so everyone knows, I called Angie pretty much first, was like, oh my God, I dreamt I had cancer. I was dying and all these other things. And she's like, oh, it could be just change. So, yeah, dreams are just a form of communication, and so it's not always true.
And a big part of like our individuation process, which the individuation process is becoming more of our true self. So when we are young, we develop an ego, which is super important because that's how we survive and interact with the world. So we develop like these different personas that we put on that we learn are okay for that time frame. And we need them. It's important to have a healthy ego and a healthy persona to navigate that. But then when we get to adulthood and we have more choice, then it's important to utilize those persona and ego choices to free us from the obligatory of what we assume is expected of us into our choice of action. So death in our dreams, death in like if you get a tarot card pulled, the death card, like they use it in horror movies all the time, and they're like, "Oh no, you're gonna die! Watch out!" Well, in in this in this realm, those are oftentimes a sign that like an old persona, an old habit of our ego can die. Like the chrysalis, like basically a caterpillar dissolving into the goo to become the butterfly, to become more of your true self. So it is a death in a way. It is a dying of old obligations, of an old persona, an old aspect, but it's a transformation, not a permanent death.
True. Well, I agree. It's symbolism. This is something I've been thinking about a lot, especially because we approach it differently, but it's really similar. It's just style, which is we got to get over fear, and you've got to create what you want your future to be. And you said something about as adults we have more choice. And as I was an adult, because of how I was raised, I didn't feel like I had a lot of choices. And I still think that there's a lot of people who are droning on in life doing what they think that they're supposed to do and behaving how they think they're supposed to be, living the lifestyle. I'm supposed to be married with 5 kids because that's what everyone else did, and not kind of paving their own way. And it feels like it it's a part of our mental health issues and the fact that we can't be who we truly are. Um, in the gay community, that was a big part of who they are. But it's not always just these big things like our sexuality. It could be how we want to live in a career, what we want to do in life. How do you help people get comfortable with making those kinds of changes, or even going in to discover like what
Mm.
what it means to make those changes and to not be afraid and to find who you are?
Yeah, those are all great questions and lots of juiciness in that. So, like the supposed tos and the shoulds can kill us. We can choke on all the supposed tos and the shoulds that we could have. And I think one of the awesome things about Jungian life coaching is that there's no needing to get over fear or to push it away or to be like, oh, I got over that. It's really befriending our fear or befriending our shame or befriending our doubt because what we resist persists. So, like, the more that we resist it, the more it gets shoved into our shadow, the more it acts out. So, by pushing away our fear, by pushing away our shame, the more we really kind of like feed the beast of what it is. But if we befriend it, because Jungian life coaching and Jungian psych looks at it like the fear, the shame, the doubt, it's all trying to protect us. And maybe it's a misguided protection. But the fact of the matter is it really trying to be our friend to help us survive. And so by sitting with it, by actually sitting with the fear, or even like I like to joke about like uh dancing with my shame is I call her Shania's shame. And we like talked about so like Shania, she no longer gets to drive the car of my life, but I have heard her out and she may be in the back seat or hanging out or whatnot. Because sometimes shame is important. We need to realize when we've done something that isn't in alignment with ourselves or how we want to be as a person. And also, shame doesn't get to drive the car, just like fear doesn't get to drive the car when we make choices. So that's why courage is moving forward despite fear. So it's not about killing our fear or I don't have fear anymore. It's about befriending it, integrating it, sitting with it, see what it has to say. Because really within its voice, it's like, what are you trying to say here? And then once it's like sharing that with you, where am I feeling it in my body? What does that experience look like? And what does it need from me? In Jungian life coaching, it really doesn't matter where in your past it is, but sometimes it comes up. You're like, oh, that was my 5-year-old self. And I can sit with her and be like, I got you, girl. My little 5-year-old me, I can be the adult that she needed at that time, or I can be the one that hugs her and comforts her. And I don't need to be driven by my 5-year-old aspect of fear anymore. So it's really a wonderful, beautiful process because it is totally client led. Each person in their own body have all the tools they need. As a Jungian life coach, I am just there beside them, helping to shine a light and explore with them. And maybe where there's block, help them see, well, let's look through this little crack here, or let's look around this bend. Because when we get overwhelmed by Shania's shame, or like when it comes to doubt, I always called it the Duke of Doubtington. So the Duke of Doubtington, we get caught up in that walt of it. And so having an outside observer helping to ask questions that breaks us around, helping to do different visualizations and check in where in our body we experience things helps us to basically bypass some of the barriers that we've set up for ourselves.
You brought up a couple of things. One is naming. You know that in our house, Finnegan is blamed for a lot of stuff. So for those of you who don't know, Angie found our dog Finnegan on the streets eating bark. And I had just lost my cat, Max, who was just my everything. She couldn't keep Finnegan and we fell in love and he's been in our life ever since. But our dear little Finnegan will get the blame for things. And it's great when you make like little personas for things that doesn't make the shame about you. It's someone else. It's something else. It's that Shania shame. It's not you. It's Shania. I think that is just such a powerful tool because it helps us to work with our ego and it helps us to work with it and not make it who we are, but just something else.
I
Super
love
important.
that. Oh, I'm sorry.
No, I was going to, no, go ahead. And then I have a second point when you're done.
Oh, it's just, I love that you use Finnegan with that because Finnegan, you love him so much and he is your child and a part of your world. And so, like, I think that that's a really good example. Like, when it is our fear or our shame, like, they're a part of our internal family, like, they're a part of our makeup. And like, they are still an important part, even if they are acting up, so to speak. But they bring richness to our life. So I love that it's Finnegan because if he's doing it, you love him unconditionally, that you're not getting rid of Finnegan, but you're able to address that issue because you love him and can then utilize him as a tool to address these other things that are coming up to be little resolved issues.
The other point I wanted to make was that, you know, even in a crowd, we look and we think we see someone and we're like, hey, there's so and so, there's Joe. And then we look again and we're like, oh, wait, that's not Joe. It's just someone who looks a lot like Joe. And I think that we do that too with, you know, Frank fear, whatever you name fear, or Shania shame. We can think we're recognizing it, but it's not. It's just something that kind of looks like it, but it's not really fear. It's that ability to examine it and say, oh, wait, you know what? This isn't really anything to be afraid of. Like, because it's just not anything that's as fearful as I thought it was going to be. So I think that's also helpful. A great thing about that naming, because just like we can misperceive people that we think that we see, we can misperceive our emotions and potentially be feeling something that is just a reaction, but might not necessarily be true.
Well, that's perfect too, because in Jungian life coaching, it's the ego that sees things as outside of ourselves. So if someone is irritating us or things are happening, we're like, oh, why is this happening to me? That's the ego aspect. Whereas the higher self like understands about like our power of creation. And so it is about being like, okay, so what in this situation and this person is triggering this in me? So like that, like seeing that as an extension of ourselves. So if we're like creating our own world and we're living from a place of creation, this person, this fear, the situation is acting up to help give me a chance to heal, unearth something in my shadow, work on it, and integrate it. So that problem feeling, problem person, problem situation is a gift. And sometimes we don't want that gift. We're tired, we're exhausted, we're like, give me a little less. But that is the gift of that situation is it allows us the opportunity to integrate more of what has been shoved away so that we have more tools, that we have more aspects that we can work with and work from. Because if someone's acting out and we're having a reaction to it, if a 5-year-old is having a complete meltdown on the floor, we don't take that personally. We're like, that's rough to not have your lollipop, buddy. Sorry about that. But it doesn't take over our emotions. We're not like, why was that child so upset? So when someone else triggers that in us, it's giving us this wonderful reflection and opportunity to explore more.
It's true. I mean, we like to think that our emotions are because of other people. And that's one of the hardest things, I think, to really get to own and to acknowledge. Because you know what happens when you start to own your feelings? Responsibility. And yeah, ooh, yuck. I'm always thinking about like emotions and podcast topics. And one of the things I was thinking about before we got started was the problem with wanting and wanting. And what I mean by that is like, we want to have better mental health. We want to have all these things, but we have a conflict with the other wants where I don't want to do what it takes to make that change. And so when you have the conflict of the wants, it's just a matter of which one is going to win out, right?
So in Jungian life coaching, we call that like other aspect, the resistance quality of that. And so like resistance is extra juicy in our books because that's where the gold is. Like, oh, let's dig into this
Yeah.
resistance. If they it's like, ooh, there is something at the bottom of this that is your goal. That is like the key to your freedom in this situation. It's like, what is at the bottom of it? Is it the fear of death, the fear of being alone, is it shame, is it sadness? Who is our friend at the bottom that is like, I'll need attention? So we dive into that, lean into that want, that resistance. Anytime that there's a trigger, there's these dueling wants or a live emotion that comes up, that's the good stuff to delve into.
For
It's
you.
very sweet.
It's the gold for you to get into, but people are resistant to change. There's a serious comfort with knowing that feeling that you've had for years and years and years, and what would it feel like to not feel it? And how do you help people to get past just the resistance of investigating?
Yeah. So I would argue actually that it's the gold for them, because whether or not they break free of that, that does, I mean, like, I want them to be free and to be their like most living alive self. But like
I get it.
that's the journey for them. Yeah,
But they
right.
don't see the gold quite yet.
Oh,
They
well, of
right?
course
Like,
not, because like
yeah.
the mining for the gold can be difficult. You have to hike over terrain. There's like getting the equipment. So in that resistance, what I always like to warn people, I'm like, so are you sure you want to do this work? Is this something that you actually want to do? Because it's not, I wouldn't say what it's like easy. It's not always about feeling good, because the aspect of it is that when there is something uncomfortable, we get to sit in it. Like, oh, I'll get down there in the mud with you. We're going to sit in it, and there's going to be some twigs poking us. Maybe there's something moving in the mud. We'll like check that out together. But we get comfortable with sitting in the uncomfortable, because in that discomfort, and the more you wait it out, the more information we get, the more things open. So just like when someone's sculpting from marble or carving a stone or pressing a diamond, like those different works of art, they don't just come about because they were just lolling about in the sun. It's because they were carving away, digging in to the the depths of it to unleash itself. So we will sit in that discomfort together. And it's totally normal to want to escape from that, because I mean, like, evolutionary wise, we survived because we're like, if this hurts, I don't keep touching it, right? We survived from those instincts. And now we're going beyond survival, and we're wanting to get into thriving and the different higher levels of being our true self, not just out of making sure that we're fed and we have a house over our heads, but out of following our soul's purpose, our life's purpose. And that involves undoing some of the things that just kept us alive. Because when you're bleeding, when you're in an emergency room, it doesn't matter. We don't care about that scar or whatever. We just want to stop the bleeding. But now we're no longer bleeding. Coaching is for when you had a pretty good point, but you want to move forward. You're like, I'm not doing my full potential. I'm not getting to the places where I want to go. I keep self-sabotaging. I mean, this about me is there's been many times over the years where I started on a path and then I like hid back in my little hidey hole because I was not ready. Can't want to. Nope,
Yes.
that's scary. And the resistance is real, and nobody is immune from that. And also we don't beat ourselves up about that resistance. There's always going to be another call to adventure. There's always going to be that. But we don't want to, like, when we're ready to not just be waiting for the next call to adventure, when we're like, okay, no, it is more uncomfortable to sit in my life where it is now, even if it's pretty good. Like, you're like, yeah, I have a great place. I have wonderful friends. I have a great partner. My job, decent, cool, but something's missing. So there's a certain point where we decide it's worth that discomfort, because the discomfort of growth is less uncomfortable than the discomfort of staying where we are.
And I like to caveat this kind of stuff because I don't think it's always as uncomfortable as we think it's going to be. Like we
Sure.
do have this predictive nature. And when we talk about playing in the mud or sitting in the mud with someone, it's not always like, thick mud up to your neck, getting real dirty. I think the value of what you do is great. And I know that you've helped a lot of people. This Jungian Life Coach is one tool in a myriad of tools that you have in your toolbox. It's not always overwhelming. I'm only saying this because if anyone's like, oh, I don't want to get in the mud, I think that's really important is that you're making it playful. It's serious, but at the same time, just like you did with Shania Shame, it's getting a little bit uncomfortable, but also creating some comfort around the discomfort. And then the other thing I was thinking about is if we're just trying to carve out how we want our life to be, there's definitely times where I know you have to look back. And because if the scar had healed up perfectly and there's no problem with all the things that happened in life, and I do believe our scars are what help us to become and make us these fabulous human beings that we are. But if it didn't heal well, or there are still some things that are left over, it's important to have someone such as yourself to be there to finish up that healing process or see what part of that you're not healed from. So I don't know. I just felt like I needed to say that.
No, I love that. Yeah, I mean, yes, I think that you're absolutely right, where sometimes people assume it's going to be much harder than it actually is. Like you said, where it's just like a little bit of mud, like flicking, no big deal. And then I also think that sometimes people realize when they do get like full in the mud up to their neck, that it becomes like a mud bath where you're like, oh, like it's actually more comfortable to get into it than resist it, that it's actually serving me better and I come out feeling better at the other end of it. So it's totally true. Or like that person who's like, I can't swim. They fall into the water and they're like, stand up, put your feet down. You're gonna be okay.
Yeah, I always like to remind people that when you track your anxieties, when you track these things that you think are going to be absolutely, unbearable, or it's going to turn out poorly, or I can't do this, and then they look back and see, oh, wait, what? 7% of my anxieties were actually true. I mean, it's amazing what our brain does to us. And like you said earlier, it's in an effort to protect us, but it's also because we've never allowed the experience to happen. And if you've never worked with a coach, or if you've never even dipped your toe into the pool of self-examination, you might be unable to go in the water because you don't even realize that you don't have to swim at first. You can just, those pools where you go deeper and deeper. When we were kids, we sat on a step, then we went a little deeper, and then we were able to go into the 3-foot section because we were tall enough where our heads were over it. And then you learn to go into the deep end. And I think that should be the approach to everything in life. Go from fear to cautious, take a little bit more, and then you get curious and you want to know, hey, what's at the bottom of the deep end of the pool? And I can still remember as a kid going down because I always wondered what was in that drain, like what happened when you got near the drain. So that's what I did. I put on my mask as soon as I could. I got down to the deepest part of the pool, and I saw that it just sucked up water. I should have known that, but I was little. So it's important to realize is that just moving through something cautiously and working with someone such as yourself, because the outcomes can be just transformational.
It's the building resilience portion, right? Like
Yes.
when we survive a little bit more, we survive a little bit more, and we're like, oh, okay. And so it becomes more and more comfortable to do change. And it's helpful when we have someone there with us. walking beside us, to be able to move forward in that way. And then we become a little bit more brave the next time, for sure, because we're like, hey, did that.
Yeah, after my divorce, I was talking to a friend of mine, and his mom was divorced. Her husband, his dad, left her for another woman. Similar story to millions of us. And she never moved on. The fear of being able to get into another relationship stopped her from ever doing anything. And so she denied herself the potential to find a better relationship, to find a healthy relationship. And that's how I feel like when we let our fear of self-examination to dip that toe in the water, is that we're denying ourselves the emotions, the feelings, the experiences that potentially are out there that will create the kind of life we want, just out of fear of the unknown, rather than trying to get a little bit more comfortable with it.
Right. That fear that's trying to protects us from also the good things too.
Right.
If
Exactly.
we let it. And depending on what that woman's belief system is, like, maybe the next lifetime she was able to approach that. And then there's also gifts in working with that resistance and fear around it too. So it's that's kind of what I'm really into about Jungian style, is that, like, whatever our journey is, we can work with any aspect of it to move us forward. There's no have to. It is all about, like, our opportunity to move forward. So it's like, what kind of life do you want to live? Like, what right now, what is like the biggest life that you could choose for yourself, that you would want to do for yourself? And what is the meaning behind that? And then, like, when you find that meaning that drives you, that's not about, like, I want, a lot of money or a lot of cars, but like that, like, higher purpose meaning is what can also, like, help spark that fire and move us forward during those times where it's really hard and that resistance and that fear comes up really hardcore for us. And it is hard when our heart is broken. That can be a real game changer for putting us on pause or really launching us forward. Either way, it can go either way for that. And I would like to, like, maybe invite people to be like, take those and put them in your own toolbox. Like, that becomes your own tool that
Yes. Yeah. That
anytime you want.
Yeah, that was kind of what I was trying to say. Like, you go in, you say, I like this, I don't like this. And oh, wait, I had this before. So no, you're 1,000%. So people know Angie was a pre-reader for my book, Yucky Yummy, Savory Sweet, Understanding the Flavors of Emotions.
Yes, chef.
Yes, we chef. Yes, chef. Thank you. Unless you read the book, you won't know what that means. In my book, I talk about emotion recipes, which is basically what has to happen for you to feel a certain way. And I want to make this the habit for my podcast, is to end it with asking the guests, what has to happen for you to feel love? What are the ingredients in the world around you and inside of yourself that need to be there for you to cook up love?
Ooh, I feel like that dish continuously gets new ingredients added and subtracted to it, but I guess
As a good chef would.
I think my current recipe includes trust. It includes uh, playfulness. It includes um, genuine affection. It includes uh, like delicious safety and um, I would say humor. And it would also include like deep amounts of bravery.
So I'm just going to have you break that down because those are all terms, but what would that look like? So when we think about perceptive, so let's just take one or two of those. So for you to feel trust, because you're actually, and this is good, Ange, because I'm
No, I love it. Let's do it. It's
so because
perfect.
this is going to kind of help me break this down for other people, and I think this is really good. So
Me too.
the so what when we talk about all these different things, you talk about bravery, you talk about trust, those are actions, but it's not the action. That's like saying, I want sugar, but what kind of sugar? How do you want something sweetened? So would it be table sugar? Would it be, what is trust? Like, what are the actual actions of trust? Because that's where the perceptions come in, is what is actually happening. That
Yeah.
it would be someone who, let's just say, keeps their word. Like what?
Yeah. Someone who keeps their word, someone you can depend upon, like someone that you can, that you like that
So it's you,
I,
and
yeah, yeah. So it's
yeah.
like, yeah, keeps word, depends upon, I can depend upon them. And also that I know that unequivocally that um, they will be there. Yeah.
Great. And the reason I'm taking you through this is because this,
Enough least.
yeah, this is the kind of thing that we don't realize. Like, it's the details in the recipe. It's not just trust. It's, what you need to feel trust is completely different than for me. And so when we talk about trust, it's what that looks like. What is happening? What are the actions that take place? Because without the actions, trust is just kind of benign.
Maybe.
Yeah, it's very ambiguous. So when we talk about emotion recipes, it's getting down to the actions, to the words, to the smells, to the all of those things, because that's what make up our perceptions, is literally the activity, not just the words.
I think it's great because I feel like those are something that should be discussed in like every relationship, right? Like, I mean, those are even great like questions for a first date. Like, how would you how would you describe like what is trust to you? Like, what does that mean to you? And what does that look like to you? I think those are
What
so
has
important.
to happen for you
Yeah.
to feel trust?
Yeah.
Yeah. So trust is not an answer. Um,
Right.
Trust is a word, but the actions are what makes you feel trust in your love.
Right. I think that's brilliant. I think it's brilliant.
Well, I want to thank you for joining me here today. And can you please share with everybody how they can get in touch with you? And it will also be in the show notes. So you don't have to write it down, but I will post the URL and all of the social media links in the notes. But Ange, if you would talk about it.
So you can reach me either on my website, www.yoursacredmagic.com, or you can find me also on Instagram at yoursacredmagic.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Ange. I love you
Thank
so
you.
much.
I love
And
you.
I appreciate you being my numero uno guest.
My pleasure. It is such an honor to be here, the first of many. You have so much wonderful, rich information for people. And I'm so glad that you're sharing it with the world. So thanks for the honor.
Well, the feeling is mutual. And thank you, everyone, for listening. And we will talk to you next time. Yes, it can. And what direction I went.
I know.
Yeah.
Well, it's the same girl that was like, I'm diving to the bottom of the pool and checking out the.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I'm stubborn, as you well know. So it's like, I am not going to let anybody keep me back from whatever. So part of it was just plain old stubborn personality too. Well, and I just want to
stubborn or fortitude. Stubborn or fortitude.
how about
I
both?
mean,
Do you really have to pick between the two?
I don't think so.
No. I think both things can be true at once. I want to wrap this up with pointing out the importance of finding. It's an old cliche. Oh, you need to find yourself. But there is no one on this earth like you. And when I say you, I'm talking to the person who's listening. I'm talking to my Miss Anne, to myself. Like, there's only one of us. Our DNA, even when we are twins, identical, quote unquote, shared egg, we are still different. And that is what I think is spectacular about life, is to find that out. And I don't personally want to be on my deathbed going back and saying, boy, I really wished I wouldn't have let this divorce keep me back from enjoying life. I wish I wouldn't have let this one bad experience keep me from doing this, finding love, finding, the things that are important to me, or even being able to discover what's important. How many people say, I don't know what I want? And to me, that's one of the biggest tragedies is not knowing what you want and not understanding there's a way to figure it out. And that's what people like you do. So thank you.
I mean, that's the biggest gift that we can give to ourselves in the world, is setting ourselves free to be who we truly are and to share our gifts with the world. Playing small is really the biggest tragedy that we could do. The more that we set ourselves free, we inspire others to set themselves free. And the time that it takes others to set themselves free gets smaller and smaller the more that we learn to do it and share it. So it really is like, we do it for ourselves, we do it for the world, and it's a gift. Individuation is a gift.
It is a true gift, yes. Unfortunately, society has put out a lot of boxes. We get put into these labels, and so we don't realize, well, look, I can try this label out, and I can try this label out, and I can, see what this is like, and I can see what this is like, and kind of pop from box to box. And then with each box that you jump into, you get to take something from it, and you get to leave something behind, because you might want more of this or less of this. And that's really the discovery